All right, so now we're going to wrap up with a couple of questions I get regarding psychoeducational assessments. And this is one I'm asked often. Do I get a copy of the report? And yes, you absolutely should. No matter what your child is being assessed in, whether it's speech and language, or whether it's a psychoeducational evaluation or an occupational therapy evaluation, you should get a copy of each of those reports before you leave the IEP at which they are presented. So if you go to an IEP and you don't have a copy, feel free to ask the assessor if you can get a copy and when you can expect it. And really, you should be having that copy before you leave the meeting. So if that's an issue for you, make sure that you let the team know that you're concerned if you don't get a copy, because you really should leave the meeting with a copy. Additionally, you want to keep in touch with that assessor, because if later on you're reading through the assessment report and you have a question, you want to be able to reach out to the assessor and ask them directly that question you have about the report that they wrote. A lot of times they're going to know their report better than somebody else, and they can give you valuable insight regarding some of the information contained in that report. It might be difficult to read because some psych reports are very jargony, and that may be a time where you need to reach out to the assessor to get some support for deciphering what's in that actual report. Another question I get asked is, does my child automatically qualify for special education if they are assessed? And the answer is no. The purpose of the assessment is to determine whether or not they're going to qualify. And so sometimes we do an assessment and a child does not meet disability criteria. Don't worry, because even if they don't meet criteria, we still have some valuable information contained within that assessment that we can use to help them to do better in school. And we can also create accommodations for them that does not require an IEP. And we can use our psychoed eval to help with some of that accommodation. So keep that in mind, that even if they don't qualify, we can still use that report to help us to build a better school program for them. Another question I get asked is, what other assessments are there? And there are so many, and these are the ones that I've listed that I could, think of off the top of my head. There may be others that I haven't heard about because I don't know everything about special education, but these are ones that come up often. So you got like a one-on-one aid assessment. That's where a child typically has some kind of need that can't be addressed alone. A lot of times it's like a diapering need or a medical need, and they may need a one-on-one aid, and there's an assessment for that. You have adaptive PE, meaning that this child can't participate in regular education PE due to some sort of a limitation. And so they have this adaptive PE, but there's an assessment for it to determine if they need it. Assistive technology is an assessment that determines whether or not the child needs some tools to help them to access the curriculum or to access a skill such as reading or writing. And there's an assessment that takes place and a recommendation that comes out of that. Deaf and hard of hearing is an assessment to determine whether or not a child needs deaf and hard of hearing support. They might need sign language, they might need certain types of systems in order to hear better. And so that assessment would be done for that. Educationally related mental health services is an assessment that looks at the need for ERMS, or educationally related mental health services. In other words, is counseling at a really intense level needed for the student, and that assessment determines that, and the team decides how much counseling is really needed. A functional behavior assessment looks at the child's behavior and the reason for their behavior, and seeks to provide behavior support so that they can use more adaptive behavior rather than undesired behavior to achieve the same function. Occupational therapy assessment looks at the need for occupational therapy, and that assessment is going to be typically done with a lot of participation from teachers and parents, and some direct work with the child. Orientation and mobility is an assessment that looks at the need for orientation and mobility for our blind students, so how to navigate their environments, and that recommendation is made to the team. A manifestation determination is an assessment that's done when children have a change of placement, or when they get to a certain amount of days of suspension, or when they're going up for expulsion. And a manifestation determination assessment, a lot of times is a review of what exists, but sometimes some added tests or measures are given to the child in order to learn a little more. A nurse or a health assessment is an assessment that's typically done in conjunction with the psychoeducational evaluation. And in that assessment, the nurse is going to learn about some of the child's medical basics, as well as hearing and vision. For our children who have more complex conditions, the nurse is going to work with the family to get detailed health information about those conditions, and then possibly may create something called a health plan based on that information. A physical therapy assessment is very similar to that occupational therapy assessment. There's going to be a lot of work in conjunction with the teacher and the student to learn more about those physical therapy needs, and a recommendation will be made to the team. A speech and language assessment is looking at the need for speech and language therapy. And also that assessment can be done by itself. So that's one that a lot of times our kids who are getting assessed for special education in the other areas of disability, not speech and language, they typically, if they're already identified for special ed, it's typically in the area of speech and language, and we're adding on to another area. But speech and language can be a standalone area, and children can qualify in that area without qualifying in any other areas, and they can get an assessment for just speech and language that can determine whether or not they qualify. And we see that a lot with our younger children. A transition assessment is an assessment that looks at a child's transitional period from college, from high school to college or to work. And it looks at sometimes careers or what are they good at, maybe does an inventory of skills, and a recommendation is made on how to best support transition. And then a visual impairment assessment is looking at visual impairment and how that impacts education, and whether or not there's certain qualifications that need to happen or be made, or supports that need to be given for this student. And like I said, these are the ones I could think of off the top of my head. There may be something I missed, but in general, these are assessments that you might see out there. So in closing, I just want to say that I know it's a stressful thing to be in the IEP process. And I know that, a lot of parents feel really uneasy because it can be overwhelming. There's a lot of information and there's always a lot to learn. Even every meeting, you learn something new. But I just want to tell you to hang in there and keep learning, be a forever learner in this, because your child needs you to do that. And just keep asking questions, and feel free to always contact me, and also to get involved in your local CAC, your advisory committee, because when you get involved in things like that, you're able to network with other parents who are in a similar situation, and you guys can support one another and share information and help each other through the IEP process, which is, it just is stressful because we love our kids and we care about our kids. We want to make sure we're supporting them in the best way we can, and want to make sure we're advocating for them. And all of that is completely normal and understandable. So hang in there. You got this. Keep doing what you're doing as a parent. And like I said, you can reach out to me. This is my email here. And I also have an Instagram. You're free to follow me. You don't have to follow me. If you go on the page, you can actually access it without following me. There's a ton of information there, and I describe a lot of different methodology for assessments, as well as provide a ton of resources and explanations. So please feel free to check it out and give me a follow if you're interested, or you can also message me there if you have questions or you need help with something. Thank you for your time, and take care, and keep advocating for your kids.